Right.
Clapperboard. I want a
So,
clapperboard.
Mummy, we haven't actually spoken about Ted Berman. So, do you want to tell us how you met and what happened?
Ted Berman was a friend of my sister Rene's. I don't know about a friend, but they were both not well and had gone to what in those days people went to a convalescent home. You didn't get sent out of hospital when there was something wrong immediately. You usually had a spell of 2 weeks in a hospital, in a nursing home,
Convalescent.
which was in the country or the seaside. And Auntie Renee had an appendicitis, and she went, and Daddy had a very bad bronchial attack, and he went, and they met, and he came round to the house once. I was a little girl, well, not little, but I was only a teenager then, and couple of years later, during the war, Uncle Asher was walking along the street and he saw him in uniform, and he said, you know, what are you doing in London? And he said, well, I'm on leave, but I don't want to go to where my parents are because they've gone to Windsor, and it's very awkward for a soldier in Windsor because all you're doing is saluting the officers. So Uncle Asher said, well, come round to our house. And he came round and he said, my mother will make you some egg and chips. And my mother made them egg and chips. And he went back. And then the next time he came on leave, he came and knocked on the door. My mother asked him in. He was another boy, you know, he was in the army. I had a brother in the army who was, at that moment, he was in what we call Israel now, which was Palestine then. And Uncle Norris was in Palestine. And he joined the army when he was in Palestine. So he was a British soldier, but in Palestine.
Mm-hmm. So how did you start going out with Daddy? What happened?
Well, every time he came up, he was he didn't have anything to do. That's what he said. So he came round to where I work, and I worked in a small place, and the boss didn't mind if he came. And I think it was the winter, and it must have been cold, and he used to come and stay there. But he never asked me out, I never went out. And then one day, one of the other workers said to him, why don't you ask her out if you want to? So he said, oh, I don't think she'll want to. Anyway, he asked me, and I went to the pictures with him.
Can you remember what you saw?
I can't remember. And that started it off, and I started to write to him. So we corresponded with each other, and then every time he came on leave, he would come round, and one day he said, you know, I'd like to take you over to Windsor, to my house, to meet my parents and my sister. His youngest sister was living at... The reason they went to Windsor was that his younger sister was evacuated there. So I said, all right, and we went there. But on the way, he said to me, I want you to know that my mother is not like your mother. Your mother says a time, and you go round there, and whatever she's making is ready, and we all sit down together at the table. But my mother is not like that at all. My mother is very, very, very awkward. It takes ages to get things done. So when we got there to the house, it was a tiny little house, and Auntie Helen opened the door and said to Daddy, take her for a walk, take her for a walk, we're not ready, we're not ready. And so we went for a walk, and I couldn't understand it. Anyway, it was finally about 2 o'clock that we finally got back there. And she made a very nice dinner. Auntie Helen was in the middle of making the afters, which was, I remember, it was a jam tart. And when Auntie Helen came to the door, Auntie Helen was making this jam tart. And it was very nice, and they were very nice. And then after that I started to go occasionally, but I was warned, so I knew that if she asked us for 1 o'clock, it would be 2 or 2:30 by the time we got dinner. So I learnt that way. And we corresponded, and he used to come up to London and we used to go out, and in the end he used to stay at our house. I know nowadays, well, when my children were younger, it was being frowned upon for a boy that wasn't relation to stay in the house, but in those days it was different. There was a war and people were sleeping in odd places.
Did your mother encourage you to go out with him, or was she surprised, or what was her reaction?
I don't think she could. She was a Jewish boy, and that's all she knew. Oh. And
tell you. I think you can remember how. Can you remember how he proposed?
Well, it wasn't until I was in the ATS. When I went into the ATS, he used to come down. Instead of coming to my house, when he was on leave, he used to find a place to stay, an old army camp, and stay and come down to see me always. And we went out, we used to go out. And a couple of times he went down to see his parents, but he spent most of the time. And as soon as I was off duty, I would go and meet him, and we'd go out. And I remember once he wanted to go to a dance. It was a local dance. And when we got there, they said to him, where are your shoes? So he said, my shoes? I said, I've only got my army boots. Oh, you can't use our dance floor with army boots. And they said, never mind, we'll try and find you a pair. But nobody had his size, because he took a size 10, I think it was, and there was everybody else had small feet, and it was really awkward. And in the end they said, okay, if you want to dance, just dance on the end. Don't use the whole floor. Just dance on the end. And one day he came down and he said, I went to see my brother, and I told my brother all about you, and his brother said to him, well, why don't you tell her how you feel? So one day we met each other, and he said, come on, I want to take you along by the river. There was the river not far, and we were on this bridge, and he said, my brother said, I said, what do you mean your brother said? My brother said, why don't I ask you? And I said, all right.
And when was that?
My mother,
when was that?
But
was
my
that?
mother said, you're not getting engaged or married until the war's over.
So how long was it before, from the time he asked you to the time you got married?
Oh, well, we got engaged, it was about a year.
So it was about 1944 or?
Yes,
something
yes,
like
it was about a year.
Mm.
And then he came and he asked me, and
So how long
he
had
said
you
he's
known
got
him?
some money. He said, I've got some money to buy a ring. And he came, and I remember it was a Friday. It's a funny day to go out and buy an engagement ring. But he said, well, that's the only time that he had. And I went with him to Houndsditch. And in Houndsditch there was this big jewellers, and they had what they called unredeemed pledge. An unredeemed pledge was
Something that'd been pawned?
something which had been pawned, but it was worked because there was 100% purchase tax on things like jewellery. So if you got an unredeemed pledge, you didn't pay tax on it.
Okay,
so I found this ring. I think Daddy paid £50 for it.
It's a lot of money in those days.
Yeah, and it was a beautiful, beautiful diamond ring. And I came home with it, and I remember Uncle Izzy was in our house at the time, and he said, what's this, a Friday? You go out and buy an engagement ring? But there was no such thing as an engagement party or anything. I just got the ring. And then he had to go back he was in Germany at the time. And then he went back to Germany. And when he got back, that was when the war was over. And so my mother said, all right, you could arrange a wedding. So we arranged the wedding for October. And everything was going so nicely. And there were some very heavy storms in the sea. And the boys came home from the front, from the army, by boat. But if the weather was bad, the crossing was cancelled. And the crossings were cancelled. And I remember Booba Berman coming round and saying, phone up the War Office, phone them up and say you're getting married and you've got to come back. And I said, I can't do that. You don't think they're going to take notice of me, what I say?
Was she living in Windsor still, his mother?
No, by then she had come back. And she lived in Stamford Hill. Anyway, finally, there was the boats were sailing again. And he came home. We got married on the Tuesday, and he came home on Sunday night.
Ooh.
So he cut it very fine.
But he got there.
But he got there in the end.
Where did you get your wedding dress from?
The wedding dress, we couldn't afford a wedding dress. But Daddy had a cousin who had got married about 6 months before us.
Who was that?
And
Who was that? Do you remember?
I can't remember. His name was Phil. Daddy's cousin was Phil. Oh, Sylvia, her name was.
Oh, does he? Phil and Sylvia. Okay.
Yeah. And she said, I've got my wedding dress. But he was stationed in Canada. And she'd taken her wedding dress to Canada. So she said, if I manage to get it sent over, somebody brings it over, you could borrow it. Anyway, when it came, it fitted me, but I wasn't very keen on the train of the dress had been cut off because she'd used it once as an evening dress. So I took it to where I worked, and she sewed it back on again, and she got a lot of netting, and she, you know, made it look a bit more fancy. And that was the wedding dress.
Oh.
Very nice.
And then I gave it back to her.
And on the day, did you do your own hair? Or did you have somebody?
No. We had a barber lived round the corner. And it was a gentleman's barber, but the lady was also a barberess. And hairdresser. And she, I mean, there wasn't such a thing as, like now, they did it with tongs. They had like, well, so I think they got tongs now, but with electric, but this was, they had these on gas.
They just heated it up.
And they would just go like that and spit it.
Try not to frazzle your hair.
Yeah. And that was that.
And did you wear makeup?
And then very little, and it was done by the woman that lived next door, the Phillipses, who lived next door to us. She came in and she said, oh, I must put some makeup on. But the bad part was, what upset me was the bridesmaids. I wanted Auntie Millie for a bridesmaid, and Daddy, Mother wanted Auntie Helen, which I could quite understand. Auntie Helen was about 15, and she'd just been bridesmaid at Auntie Reenie's wedding, which was about 6 months before mine. And Daddy's mum said she's got to wear the same dress. Auntie Millie said, I'm not wearing a dress for, it's a 16-year-old pattern dress, I want a different dress. So I didn't know what to do anyway. In the end, we compromised, and I had Auntie Minnie, and I asked Betty to be the other bridesmaids. Auntie Minnie and Betty had the same dresses, and Helen had the blue, and where I worked, the woman had a little daughter of about 4 or 5, who had been bridesmaid a few weeks before, and she had a blue dress. So it didn't look too bad. So I had 2 blues and 2 rose colour. And that was our wedding. And then we went to, straight from, wedding was only allowed to be on till 9 o'clock.
Which shawl was that?
New Rose Shawl in Whitechapel Road.
Was that all weddings had to stop at 9 because there was still...
Yeah, yes. You could, most weddings was only on in the afternoon, but this was till 9. And straight from there, Uncle Lizzie, who had the car, who was the only one that had the car, took us to Fenchurch Street Station, and we went to Westcliff for We were going to have 3 or 4 days honeymoon.
Okay, that's fine. Can I take you back a bit now to the war, to actually during the war, and some recollections about the war? I mean, I know you've spoken about being in the army, but just things that happened. You did mention something about an incident with your father at the very end of the war. So it's like those sort of incidents, you know, when something happened that could have had a very serious effect.
I used to go out a lot with Auntie Minnie when we were single. And one day we went to a cinema, which was only local, and there was an air raid warning, and we had to leave the cinema, and a few doors away was a church, and we had to go down the crypt of the church, which we did, and we were down there for a little while. And then it was very quiet. There was nothing. So I said to Auntie Minnie, let's see if we can make go to where my mother and father were in. My auntie, my mother's sister, had a shop in Kingsland Road. And it was an old police station, and so they had, down in the basement, they had an air raid shelter, which was where they used to take the prisoners. And so my mother and father, we always used to go there.
What was the shop?
Furniture shop.
This was Auntie Ray,
yes.
I presume, and Uncle Michael. Yeah.
But the time we went down to we got to the next place, we could hear the bombs go, you know, and they were you two girls, get in the shelter, get in the shelter. Anyway, we went into another shelter, and then we came out again, and we said, come on, let's try and get a bit further to where Mummy is. Mummy and Daddy will be so worried about us. And we could hear the planes above. And in the street there was shelters, but they weren't very, it was for shrapnel really. They were made of bricks, just a square brick shelter. And Auntie Minnie and I went in there. There was nobody else in there. And we were standing in there, and suddenly I said, I could hear the plane cut out. That was the time when they were sending over bombs that cut out and the bomb fell. And when it cut out, you knew it was falling near you. And Auntie Minnie and I were petrified, and we clung hold of each other, and we said the Shema together. I always remember that. And suddenly, we didn't hear anything. It had passed us over. And I said, come on, let's make a run for it again. And we went up as far as another shelter. And in the meanwhile, they were shouting at us, you two girls, get in the shelters, get in the shelters. This was the ARP men.
Troublemakers.
Get in the shelter. And we got in the shelter, and there was a crash. And I said to Auntie Minnie, that was very near. And then suddenly somebody came in and said, they've caught the ambulance, the ambulance shelter, the ambulance. Oh no, my aunt's shop was next door there. So we said, we must go, we must go. And we ran out, and there was all glass all around. And we finally got there. And they were all right. They said that the place shook a bit, but it was okay. And all my mother was saying to us was, all she was praying was that we weren't there and that we would be safe. Thank goodness the girls are not here, they'll be safe.
So it was the ambulance place was right next door?
Yes.
And was that destroyed?
There was a bomb.
You told me about what happened with your father right at the end of the war.
Oh yes. That was a story that I'll never forget. I was in bed, and it was about 7:45 in the morning, and the air raid warden went. We got up, and by that time we were so fed up we didn't bother to go to the shelter. And my father had gone to shore, my mother was downstairs, and all of a sudden there was a terrific knock. We was slung from one side of the room to the other, but we were all right. And my mother said, "Golly, that was a near one." And then suddenly somebody came, knocked at the door and was rushing in and said, "Do you know where the bomb hit? Whose Mansions?" Whose Mansions was about 5 or 6 minutes walk from where we lived. He said, a complete hit on the Mansions. And my mother said, "Oh no. That's where your father comes home from shore, and that's where he walks. At that time he would probably have been walking past there." And then there was a knock on the door. It was my father. My mother said, "Didn't you see the bomb?" He said, "What bomb?" She said there was whose Mansions? So he said, "No." He said, "I never came that way." She said, "What do you mean you never came that way?" Well, a man came out ashore with him, and he lived the other way. And he said to my father, he was talking to my father, he said, "Let's finish our conversation. Instead of walking home your way, walk home my way, and you come round the other side." And my father did. Now, if my father hadn't have gone home that way, he would have been walking past where that bomb was. And we always, was it Bashert? Was it
Miracle.
a miracle? What was it that made my father go on the other side of the road? Also, another very frightening experience was the last bomb, which was in Bethnal Green Road,